You've watched him pull away, and you've tried everything you can think of. You've asked him what's wrong, you've given him space, you've reached out with as much tenderness as you have in you, and none of it works. Here's the thing that actually breaks your heart, though. He probably still loves you. He's just locked himself away emotionally, and honestly, he probably couldn't tell you why, even if you asked him directly. This is what happens to a lot of men after 55, and if you're a woman trying to reach one of them right now, understanding why this happens changes everything about how you see him. So, what I'm about to describe is called avoidant attachment. And I want to be really clear about something first. He didn't choose this. Nobody wakes up one day and decides, I think I'll shut down emotionally now. It's a defense system, and it actually gets stronger with age, especially after 55. Avoidant attachment is basically how someone handles emotional discomfort. And what they do is pull away, disconnect, convince themselves, usually without even realizing they're doing it, that needing anyone is a weakness, and that the only real safety is in being alone. Here's what most women get wrong about this, though. He didn't develop this at 55. It's usually been sitting there since childhood, quiet, manageable, not really running the show. But around 55, something shifts. Mortality stops being an abstract idea and starts being real. Health scares start showing up. His career stops being the thing that defines him, and his avoidance system, which had been dormant for decades, suddenly kicks into overdrive. So instead of leaning into the relationship when things get hard, he leans out. I want to walk you through the 5 reasons this actually happens. The first one is mortality, and this one hits harder than people expect. At 55, a man stops believing he has infinite time left. He does the math maybe without even meaning to and realizes he's got 25, 30 good years left if he's lucky. And for someone who spent his whole life feeling like he had forever, that's genuinely terrifying. Here's what that terror does to a man who's already wired to be avoidant. It convinces him he has to be completely self sufficient. Because if he lets himself depend on you emotionally and then something happens to him or to you, the loss will destroy him. So what does he do? He builds walls. He stops needing you, or at least stops showing that he needs you. He becomes the guy who doesn't need anyone. And the cruel irony here is that this isolation makes him more alone, not less. But his nervous system isn't interested in irony. It only cares about survival. So, what does this actually look like if you're living with it? He gets weirdly fixated on his health, or he swings the other way and completely ignores it. He wants more time alone than he used to. He stops bringing up the future, stops making plans with you the way he once did. Serious conversations get deflected with a joke, or worse, silence. He seems indifferent to things he used to actually care about. But he's not indifferent, he's scared. Terror just happens to look a lot like distance from the outside. The second reason is that he never actually learned the language for any of this. Think about it. A lot of these men grew up in households where their fathers never once talked about feelings. The whole culture around them said, be strong, be quiet, provide. Emotions were something women dealt with, not something men were supposed to process out loud. So now he's 55, and he's supposed to suddenly find the words for his fear of aging, his fear of becoming irrelevant, his fear of real intimacy, and he just can't. There's no vocabulary there. It was never built. And here's where the avoidant piece makes it so much worse. Instead of trying, stumbling, getting it wrong a few times, and learning, he just gives up before he starts. If he can't say it perfectly, in his mind, there's no point saying it at all. I want to be clear that this isn't cruelty. This is a man who is drowning and has convinced himself that calling for help isn't an option. In practice, this looks like him grunting instead of actually talking to you, saying I'm fine when you both know he isn't, changing the subject the second things get emotional, getting irritated when you ask what he's actually thinking. Sometimes he'll even make you feel bad for wanting to talk about feelings at all. And it's not because he's trying to hurt you, it's because the whole conversation feels unsafe to him on a level he can't articulate. The third reason is that his entire identity is coming apart. And this one doesn't get talked about enough. For decades, his sense of self was built entirely around his job, his productivity, his ability to provide for people. He was the guy who does this, the guy at the office, the provider. That was the whole architecture of who he was. But somewhere around 55, one of two things happens. Either he's still grinding away and realizes, with a kind of quiet devastation, that he's never going to reach whatever version of the top he imagined. Or he actually got there, and it turns out the top didn't feel like anything at all. Either way, the identity cracks, and underneath it, he doesn't actually know who he is. That's terrifying in a way that's hard to overstate. So what does he do? He retreats further into the one thing he still feels like he controls, which is himself. And that means he pulls away from you emotionally, not because of anything you did, but because you represent the whole life that was built around an identity that's currently failing him. This shows up as indifference toward things that used to matter, including you, more time alone, an obsessive focus on some solo hobby that suddenly consumes him, less interest in the stuff you used to do together. He seems checked out, going through the motions of his life instead of actually living it. And if you've caught yourself blaming your own behavior for his distance, stop right there. This isn't about you not being enough. This is a man who's lost sight of himself and he doesn't know how to find his way back yet. The fourth reason is that vulnerability itself feels like weakness to him. Real intimacy requires saying things like, I'm scared, or I need you, or honestly, I don't know. For a man with this kind of attachment pattern, vulnerability is the enemy his nervous system learned to avoid decades ago. And at 55, with mortality pressing in and his identity cracking and his relevance in question, vulnerability becomes even more frightening than it used to be. Because now admitting he has feelings also means admitting he's aging, he's uncertain, and he might genuinely need someone. So instead, he disconnects. He makes himself unavailable. And here's the strange part. That disconnection actually feels safer to him, even though it's slowly killing the relationship. You cannot build real intimacy without vulnerability. It's just not possible. So by avoiding it entirely, he's not protecting what you have together. He's quietly dismantling it. In day to day life, this looks like him pulling back the moment a conversation starts to get real. Your own vulnerability gets met with criticism, or worse, dismissal. He shuts down any talk about the future, or feelings, or the relationship itself. He seems almost afraid of needing you, and you're left standing there wondering what you did wrong, when the truth is, you didn't do anything wrong at all. The fifth reason is that he's grieving, and he genuinely doesn't know it. After 55, a lot of men are quietly grieving, the version of themselves that had unlimited potential, the body that used to work without complaint, the future they thought they'd have, time they can never get back. But because his emotional vocabulary is so limited, he doesn't recognize any of this as grief. He just feels numb or angry or hollowed out, and he doesn't know what to call it. For a man wired this way, the way he processes grief is by disconnecting from the people closest to him. Because if he lets you get close, he has to actually feel it. And feeling it means losing control, which is the one thing he's spent his whole life avoiding. So he freezes you out, not to hurt you, to protect himself from the full weight of what he's carrying. This tends to look like irritability or a kind of flatness that wasn't there before, a sense that he's just going through the motions. Less passion, less engagement, depression that he refuses to name. And sometimes a quiet resignation, like he's already decided this is just what life is now, and he's stopped fighting it. There's something else worth mentioning here that almost nobody talks about, and that's the physical toll all of this takes after 55. When men are younger, stress is just background noise. They deal with demanding jobs, family chaos, relationship problems, and then they sleep it off and keep moving. The body bounces back fast at that age. But after 55, that equation changes completely. The body stops absorbing stress the way it used to. One bad night of sleep hits harder. Tension lingers instead of fading. And the pressure shows up in places you can't ignore. Blood pressure climbing, sleep falling apart, energy disappearing, even small tasks feeling exhausting. This is why a lot of older men eventually figure out that protecting their peace isn't some lifestyle preference, it's a health requirement at this point. Every fight, every emotional swing, every unresolved conflict puts real demand on the nervous system. What gets written off as normal relationship drama is physiologically chronic stress. And chronic stress at 55 hits completely differently than it did at 35. A lot of these men have spent years working hard on their physical health, exercising, eating better, going to their checkups, only to let emotional stress quietly undo all of it. At this stage of life, health and peace are basically the same thing. One holds the other up. So if a relationship is disrupting his peace, it's disrupting his health too, whether he realizes it or not. There's another danger here that's easy to miss, and that's the slow erosion of his own identity inside the wrong relationship. When a man lives alone, his routines actually reflect what he values. He does what he wants to do. His choices come from his own priorities. There's a stability in that, in just knowing who you are without having to check it against anyone else. But relationships require constant small adjustments. You give up a little time here, change a habit there, compromise on this or that. On its own, that's completely normal. That's just what being with someone looks like. But when those adjustments only ever go one direction, something starts to break down. He begins editing his own thoughts before he says them, just to avoid friction. He quietly drops activities that used to bring him joy because they create tension. He spends less time on the things he loves and more time managing what someone else expects of him. The independent man who used to feel grounded starts building his entire life around keeping someone else happy. And this is where a lot of these men lose the thing they spent decades building, themselves. The hardest part is they usually mistake this loss for love. They tell themselves that giving away pieces of who they are is just the price of being with someone. But real companionship doesn't ask you to disappear. It supports the person you already are. And once a man starts losing that sense of self, he becomes far easier to influence. far easier to control, and far more willing to stay in situations that don't actually serve him. So, what does all this mean if you're the one living it? How do you actually know if what you're seeing is avoidant attachment? Ask yourself a few things. Does he pull away specifically when you need him the most? Does real emotional closeness feel almost impossible to reach? Does he say the words but his actions tell a completely different story? Is he genuinely more comfortable alone than he is with you? If you're nodding along to most of these, you're probably looking at avoidant attachment. And here's the hard truth about it: you cannot love this out of him. It's not something you can fix by being a better partner or more patient or more understanding. This is a nervous system pattern that took decades to build, and it would take him years of deliberate work to unwind. And the honest reality is, most men over 55 aren't interested in doing that work. Now, the men who actually do end up fulfilled after 55, they approach relationships in a completely different way. And what's interesting is it's not the wealthy ones or the good looking ones or the ones with huge social circles. It's the ones who've become genuinely selective about who they let into their lives. They figured out something that takes most people an entire lifetime to learn, which is that every single person who enters your life either adds to your well being or quietly takes from it. There's no neutral. These men stop making decisions out of loneliness or attraction or fear of dying alone. They start making decisions based on compatibility and peace of mind and the actual quality of their day to day life. The questions they ask themselves shift too. Instead of, do I like her? They start asking, does this relationship actually make my life better? Instead of, am I attracted to her? They ask, how do I feel after I spend time with her? Those questions tell you a lot more than emotion ever could. And the wiser ones understand that companionship doesn't have to be romantic to matter. Some of the deepest connections come through friendships, shared interests, family, and people who genuinely respect where you stand. Those relationships give you real connection without the emotional complications and constant demands that often come with romance. The biggest lesson a lot of men learn after 55 is that fulfillment and freedom aren't actually the same thing as romance. Society spends decades telling men that happiness comes from relationships, but age has a strange way of revealing what actually matters. By this point, most men have already lived through love, heartbreak, commitment, sacrifice, and loss. They're not looking for fantasy anymore. They want something real. And the truth is, the most content men tend to be the ones who've built a life they're genuinely glad to wake up to. Routines that keep them active, friendships that keep them connected, interests that keep them engaged, a sense of purpose that gives their days some shape. They're not waiting around for someone to save them from boredom because they've already built something worth living. That's exactly why they're so careful about who they let in. They understand that anyone entering their life should add something, not create pressure. Companionship should feel peaceful, not draining, supportive, not demanding. It should open things up, not close them down. If a relationship asks him to sacrifice his health, his finances, his freedom, his identity, or his emotional stability, he stops seeing it as a gift. He starts seeing it as a cost. That doesn't mean every relationship after 55 is a mistake. Not at all. It just means every relationship deserves an honest evaluation instead of an emotional one. And the older and wiser a man gets, the more he understands that guarding his peace isn't selfish. It's necessary, because after 55, the goal isn't finding someone to complete his life anymore. The goal is making sure nothing disrupts the life he's already worked so hard to build. At the end of the day, every man has to make his own choices here, but wisdom after 55 means understanding that time is limited, energy is valuable, and peace is worth protecting above almost everything else. The wrong relationship can quietly strip away the freedom and stability you've spent a lifetime building. The right one might add real value, but it should never cost you your own well-being to get it. So ask yourself this one question: does this person bring peace into your life or pressure? If any of this resonated with you, if you've been trying to reach a man who feels completely unreachable, I want you to remember something. You're not alone in this. This pattern is quietly wrecking far more relationships than people realize. The real question was never whether he loves you. The real question is whether love is even enough when someone has locked himself away from feeling it at all. You deserve real connection. Don't settle for anything less than that.